Good afternoon, everybody. It is Wednesday, the 28th of May, and welcome back to our third and final webinar. Hopefully, we've been fine-tuning it and making sure that it's even more interesting than the last two. First of all, welcome to my co-host, Susie Green, and also our glamorous assistant, Simon Schofield, who will be looking after us today, looking after the Q&A session. So first of all, just let you know, we have three amazing guests this week. We have Dean Marsh, who is a lawyer and a legal business advisor to the creative industries.
Hello.
We also have Gary Brooks, who's back with us for a special appearance today. Gary was with us last week talking about insurance. And we also have Rachel Bronstein. Now, I'm not going to introduce Rachel Bronstein just yet because she will be our first guest, but I'm going to hand over to Susie, and Susie can tell us all about why we're doing this and all about backup tech.
Thank you for coming back. If this is your third trip with us, and if we haven't seen you before, that's fine too, because each session we want to stand alone. I was going to start by very quickly just saying I'm a tour manager. I've worked in the industry a horrendously long time, 25 years, maybe even longer when I think about it. And definitely talking about, financial well-being is something that's been really relevant for me, especially. I spend a lot of time doing other people's budgets and worrying about how much money they're making, and realize actually I completely neglected my own for a long time. So this definitely heartfelt comes out of that, and Paul will have a version of that as well. I'm also now a psychotherapist, which is a new title, and I'm a trained nutritionist, and I try and bring these different elements into what I do. Paul, do you want to just say quickly who you are and where you're from, and then I'll say a little something about backup tech?
Yeah, definitely. So for those who don't know, who have just joined us and haven't been on the webinars before, I run a small production company that is run by freelancers for freelancers. I'm quite proud to say that I think it's the most unique business in our sector because we don't employ anybody, and it's run like that. It's 25 years old this year. I'm also a production manager. I've worked with some big artists and small artists right across the board, mainly in the live music area, and I absolutely love this industry. I'm at the time of life now where we are trying to give something back, which is the whole reason why we've got these webinars on. So, Susie, I'll hand back to you and you can tell them why we're doing the webinars.
Yeah, so this is partnered with Backup Tech. And if you're not familiar with who Backup Tech are, they're a UK registered charity and they do financial hardship funding. So it's for anyone who works across touring, events, live music in some realm, broadcast, theatre. If that's your world, and you fall onto financial hard times for whatever reason, whether that's illness or bereavement, even addiction or some change in your circumstances, that's what Backup Tech are there to help you do. And we approached them, we had this idea for some education around financial well-being, because definitely we are in uncertain times and those times are evolving, and that's wherever you are in the world. Time to batten down the hatches. We may have some tough times ahead, like we haven't already been through a few in the last few years. But what we hope you'll walk away from all three of these sessions and today is just some thought-provoking ideas how you can, I guess, gain more control over your finances. And with that means your security, your safety, your long-term planning. And that's what these are for. Should we kick off then? Do you think have we waffled suitably enough to to introduce our first guest? Okay, so we have Rachel Bronstein is going to start us off with our first of our two guests tonight. And Rachel, who I had the pleasure of meeting finally in person at the conference at Rockleditz last year, and just followed what you do for a long time and couldn't actually find anyone UK based who does what you do. So hence we've pulled you in from the other side of the pond. And to kind of say a bit about what you do, you're a financial counselor and coach. You specialize sort of more specifically in touring, music industry, and industries around that. And what we were hoping then to kind of put into the context of some of the discussions we've had on the previous two calls as well about our attitudes to money. Because in a sort of a lot of people come into these industries and work freelance for various reasons, and a lot of it is freedom. But maybe it isn't freedom if you don't have financial well-being. And there's also a lot of fear around money too. And it's another reason you might not go into freelance thinking, I'm going to make pots of money. It's more likely you've gone into these kind of industries because you love what you do and you're passionate about what you do. So, Rachel, shall I hand over to you? And if you don't mind just butting
Sure.
in with questions, comments, and please just to invite everyone to likewise questions and comments, please. Um,
Sure, for sure. Thank you, Susie, for the intro. Again, my name is Rachel Bronstein. I'm a financial coach, and I started my company called Life's Jam when the pandemic hit. And I actually found the Back Lounge shortly after that and started listening in. I'm based in Miami, grew up in Boston, and I have had the privilege of speaking all over the US at music conferences and events in the last few years, just kind of bringing financial wellness to the forefront because I started in production finance at NBC out of college. And so I really understood what it took to make a show happen. And when the pandemic stopped, for fun, I had volunteered at music festivals down here in South Florida while running my husband's law firm, which I did for flexibility, and then got pretty stuck doing that and was looking to kind of give back in a different way. So I combined my passion for music and my expertise in finance and launched my company because I saw everyone after the pandemic shut it down a week in looking for rent money. And I just said, like, a week in, we didn't know how long it would last, but I just felt like maybe that there was a problem. And so the more people I called in the music industry, the more people brought light to that fact that there was no financial literacy, education, support kind of in this industry. And what's interesting specifically about touring is that it's one thing if you're running your own business and can kind of take advantages of the opportunities from running your own business. But when you're on tour, a lot of the time they make you salaried. So you're really a seasonal employee. And so you're caught between not really being an employee with benefits, other than them taking taxes out, but you're also not your own business. So you don't benefit from running your own business. And it's kind of been this thing that people have had to navigate. And over here on the US, we've had to deal with having to find health insurance and retirement. So that's been obstacles on our end that have made it more challenging. But since I've kicked it off, I've helped hundreds of people kind of take control of their money in group settings. Tour, I go out to tour rehearsals. I work with music companies. I work individually with freelancers to get more organized because what I have found a lot of the time is people can't really see their money. So the first problem is they don't really know where it's going. I would hear, I did really well on tour and now I have nothing to show for it. Or I'm doing okay for this period of time, and now I'm really not doing okay. So that feast and famine roller coaster ride, that people just get used to living with, is saying that that's just how it works. And I feel that it doesn't have to work like that. I feel like you can choose this lifestyle and have some stability in your life. But I like to peel the layers back first. So before we even talk about numbers, I like to talk about kind of what are we going after, like what's important to us, and kind of what's our feelings and thoughts and emotions about money. And a lot of that time, it starts from childhood. So it might have not been something that somebody directly told us. It might have been a parents fighting over a bill when it came in. It might have been um, even something more traumatic like bankruptcy or losing a home. It could have been that there was plenty of money, but you felt like money was always tight. Or it could be that there was never enough. And so a lot of those feelings about money come into our adulthood. And until we can kind of address those, it's hard to tackle the bigger issue of running your life and your freelance budget and all of the things just of kind of that are happening. We kind of need to see, well, what do you say about money? Do you say you're bad with money? I have clients that say they fear money. So a lot of times, if there were parents fighting about bills, you might be what we call a money avoider. So you might not want to open the bills. You might not want to deal with the credit card balances. I have clients that say, oh, I'm just going to always have a credit card balance. Like that's just what we have, right? But no, it doesn't have to be like that. And the thing is that when we have the tax debt, when we have the credit card bills that are charging us interest at 29%, it's so much harder to get ahead. So, but what happens is we become paralyzed. We become fearful or shameful, or we have guilt, or it's not a society that talks about it. So we don't really even know what the best next steps are. And so we really have to figure out what's going on with our feelings about money before we can kind of flip the script and rewrite some of that. Okay, I love it, Keith. Always pay your credit card bill off in full. I had a festival worker from a couple weeks ago that had all of this money sitting in her checking account and said, "Don't I need to leave a balance on my credit card to increase my credit score?" And I was like, no, we want to pay our bill off in full every month, especially because you can. Like, our goal is to always pay it off in full. Because that means that we're able to like live within our means. It also means that we're able to build that credit. So when we need it, it's there for us. Okay, Chloe, I repeatedly heard I can't afford it. I don't have enough money. Definitely feeling of a not enough. As an adult, I've always repeated I have enough, but I've never felt affluent. That's great. And so some of the ways that we can kind of rewrite some of these stories is to tell ourselves something positive. So not that we were bad with money, but I didn't have the tools to support what I needed to do to make good decisions. And now I'm going to get there. So I'm either going to keep building my money skills. I'm going to lean on people that can help guide me as I pave my way. I'm also going to recognize the things that I am doing well. Being a freelancer is hard. So if you're able to, a lot of times my clients are super hard workers. They're strategic. They're able to somehow put things together, and they really are holding a lot together. So there might be some areas that we have to improve on, but just kind of focusing on the things that are working, and that you are exceeding in is important to show yourselves that just that story doesn't have to be the story you tell from here forward. So hopefully that resonates a little bit.
I just
Um,
butt in and say I'm still reeling from the fact that I've just realized I've inherited my dad's script when it comes to, like he said, always pay your credit card off in full. And thinking how I left when I first moved out, that was the first thing I racked up. And then never did that again. And yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how we inherit those beliefs?
Yeah, especially, I have a family member where money was always tight. And so they're always buying on sale, even if they don't need it, because in their mind, it's a sale. So they should take advantage of that. Um, so, I mean, I've had clients who have, said the funniest stories just because that's how it was when they were younger. So, if I have a money story exercise and I'm happy to share resources after, I have actually a whole bunch of resources I can send along to everyone. And so if you want to kind of go through this money story exercise for yourself and just see if there's some things that you could rewrite to kind of put yourself in a better position, awareness and reframing the mindset a little bit that you can do it. And it doesn't have to be an overwhelming, paralyzing feeling. And so that was kind of the first thing I just wanted to talk about, was kind of understanding where we're coming from. And then once we understand where we're coming from, one of the things that I also love asking people is what's important to you? Because society tells us kind of what's important, right? The things that we can show outwardly, check the box for the house and the car. And those are the things that show success. But what I have found, especially in touring, and I know there's more than that here, is that you're choosing a life that's unconventional. And who says you need to check any boxes, right? So if you're on the road a lot and it doesn't make sense to put all of your money into housing that you never get to use, let's be strategic and creative and find other ways to solve the problem. So I always like to peel the layers back because when I start asking people questions, that's when I figure out what they truly want. So when I asked a client, why did you buy the home that you really couldn't afford. Maybe you could have afforded in your highest freelance income year, but on average, you can't really afford it. It's a stretch. And he said, I'm on the road so much, I wanted the stable home life. Like I needed something to go back to that made me feel good. So, a house is a lot harder to undo, right? Housing and car, once we're locked in, we're kind of locked in unless we make a big decision. So I always like to get people before they make those big decisions so we can talk it through. But the more that we talked, the more we could come up with strategies. Well, how can you feel that? How can you get that sense of stability, but also feel like you can make, your finances work also? And I see some stuff coming in the chat, so I was just going to pause for a second and just see if there's anything. Um, okay, Dina wrote, growing up, a sudden change in politics, parental loss of business forced our family to move to another country. There's always the feeling that there's never enough money to deal with bills. Now me, no credit card and paying bills without panic is a win. That's amazing. Because what happens is when we're faced with that, we either tend to follow how we were raised, right? Because that's what we know, or we go the opposite and we said, we don't want to live like that, or we want to learn more or take control. So that's amazing. And hopefully you can take control in a way that's not scary, right? Because we also don't want to live in a scarcity mindset where there's never enough, or you have to be so cautious that you feel like you're still worrying, even though you don't have to worry. So our goal is for you to feel like you have a plan that allows you to take care of your responsibilities now, your future self, and enjoy life, right? So I consider it a dance, a juggling act between these three things. And that's what I always strive to help people achieve. And so we want to make sure those buckets aren't super poorly weighted, because what happens also is that our enjoyment now, we get a dopamine hit. So when you go to spend right now, it gives us a sense of joy for most people. That retail therapy, it's called. So when we save, when we delay that gratification for later, we don't get that same kind of feeling. So we have to trick ourselves into almost protecting us from ourselves. And then there's those that, if we had the magic ball and knew how long we lived and how our health would be, we'd be able to make a lot different decisions, but we don't know. So I have a cousin who says, "Oh, you only live once, just spend the money." And there's a big like fear of missing out. But I find that if we can spend with intention and kind of build in that pause to give ourselves a chance to choose, right? Life is all choices, and money is our tool to get these choices. So if you're on the road and convenience is easy but expensive, but you're tired and you want to order that meal, that's okay, but you're choosing A instead of whatever B would be. So if B is a special outing with your friends, or a trip when you get home and you're not working, or it buys you a month of not having to worry about finding money, it gives you recovery time. When you put it like that, is it more worth it? So would you find somewhere to grab a sandwich or stock up on something that was easier and less expensive in order to save for the other thing? And that's one of the things that I try to get people just to spend some time thinking about, because when we're always hustling, when we're tired, when we're working really hard, it's really hard to do that. And that's just, I wanted to drop some values in the chat that come up and just see kind of what resonates with everyone. Because I feel like if we can pick some of those values, we can see if our money is going into those places now. And this is not an extensive list, but I have a big sheet. Again, we'll send along. But if you can just pick your top three and then think about if your money right now is going to those values. Just give everyone a sec.
I think with a lot of these things as well, it becomes that your values change as you get older, don't you? For being in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and when you're as old as us, me, 50s, then you start your values once again change. But I think, especially nowadays, the younger people tend to have they're driven by social media, sort of by this capitalist outlook where you must have this must have thing. And I think it's part of that is actually having the maturity and actually just to think about something. Because, like you mentioned about dopamine hits and retail therapy, I think everyone enjoys that. Whether it's buying, some really nice piece of meat that you like, or you're going to buy a new car, or anything in between, you have these things that you want to do. But they're also driven by emotion, aren't they? So they're very emotive. It's you're not being pragmatic when you think about it. So sometimes I
Right.
think you maybe have to take that step back and think, I really like this, but can I afford it? Would you say that's a
Right.
good point?
Yeah, no, that's great. And the funny thing is that, like, for example, if we did car shopping just based on the numbers, if you said, I can afford a car loan for $500, you never had to go into a car dealership, you never had to negotiate, you never tried out the car, it would be like a transaction, right? Like, who knows if it would even bring the same kind of excitement. But when you go to the car and then you have the salesperson, and hopefully they do it the same way over there, they do it here. But and then all of a sudden you're buying something that like you didn't go in, now your budget's going a little further up. Or the salesman's like, "Oh, you can only afford 500, no problem, we'll extend the loan over 7 years." Or something to make you feel better. And then you walk out of the car dealership. Oh, and then we forgot about all the taxes and the fees and like, at the end of the day, you might have committed to something more than you were ready to. And I find that to be you're locking yourself in, which is why the three big categories in spending, which are housing, transportation, and food, I always like to start there because we need those numbers to be in check to feel like we can make decisions with the rest of our money. If you've overcommitted in those three categories, it's really hard to make the other stuff work. It always kind of feels like you never have enough. Like, I can't afford the coffee, or I can't to go out to dinner with my friends. And I want you to have that wiggle room. And so those are the categories that I always want people to start with. And then I also want people to know that marketers are not our friends. And they have gotten super, super smart. So, you look at something online, now it's popping up in Instagram, or, and specifically the music industry, it's tough because you might be living on a different reality when you're on the road or you're with an artist. Or I had a client who was on the road and he was getting Uber Blacks, so the big sedans, right? And then he's coming home and he's ordering Uber Blacks because he doesn't want to wait for the car the 10 minutes. He's tired, whatever. And I said to him, I was like, that's okay if that's where you want your money to go. But you're choosing that instead of all these other things that I think are important, that you're saying are important. So something's got to give for us to make it all work, because otherwise we rack up the credit card debt. So we're spending more than we can afford. And it, it, it takes us down a road that's hard to come back from. So then you're struggling, you're always trying to make more money. And then what I've seen is that freelancers would take multiple gigs. So maybe you're doing tour management, you're doing a little artist management, you're doing some tour directing or tour advancing work. And so you have a lot of balls in different baskets. And so then you're dealing with burnout, trying to keep up mentally. And then forget tracking your money at that point because there's no time in the day. So you don't actually know where the money's going. So kind of like reeling, really reeling all that in, and understanding the bigger picture. And that's not to like overwhelm everybody, but that's kind of what I'm trying to like get people back from.
I've got it itching to comment. There's a couple of things that was making me think, because as well, it's like when all that goes out the window, it's the emotional spending. When you get into the emotional zone, suddenly common sense, your sensible side goes out the window. And I find for me anyway, that happens if I've just come off like a really hard job, or I've worked really hard and I haven't had a day off for weeks. And then suddenly I deserve it. And so
Yes.
suddenly that spending is like that's going to make me feel different or better. And of course, it's a con, isn't it? It doesn't. And the other thing I find is I have to really check myself in airports, because somehow that weird free time you have when you're waiting for a plane and there's all the shops there, and it doesn't feel like I'm spending money, and I can't explain it. But it's a funny thing, isn't it? So I guess as well, is it about identifying what your weak spots are and then planning what
So
you
I don't like
expect?
to call them weak spots. I like to I think what happens is if we have one bucket of money, so if we have one checking account and you're supposed to pay your bills there, and you have the fluctuating income because you're not really sure when it's all coming in, and you have your spending money, and you have to pay for whatever comes down the road out of this one pot, you just can't make sense of it in the moment. So if you went to the store and you had a specific account that you used for your spending money or your fun money, and you said, I have $500 for this month, it's very clear, right? You've separated it out. And then when you're in the store, you get to make the decision if you want to use that pot of money for this splurge. And I don't want you to feel bad about it. I want you to feel great about it because you've decided that that's what you want to use this extra money for. But what happens is when we're able to see it clearly, all of a sudden we're like, well, maybe I don't want to use it on that. Maybe I want to use it on something better. And that's the awareness that we try to build.
It sounds like it's focusing what's important to you, and that's the really nice comment there from Joanne. I'm 100% vulnerable to shopping on the way home from tour. I seem to gather expensive sunglasses at every stop. And knowing Joanne, that's exactly 100%
Right. I know Joanne too.
so I think it is about a part of it is discipline and also retraining your thought process. But from what I'm certainly gleaming from it is you have to start to think about this more logically. Like it's great to treat yourself, but you can't earn £1,000 a week and spend 1,500 because it's not sustainable, is it? It's really not. That's when you end up with loads of credit card debt and
Right.
lots of other things start to follow on, and you start to downward spiral.
Well, so, and I know we're running short on time, but I just wanted to hit some strategies for kind of dealing with that. So, besides having the separate account for spending money, which I really highly recommend, I also recommend moving money out of your checking account that is for later. So, maybe there's a vacation during the holidays you want to take. Maybe December is a big gift giving month. So, not everything happens in perfect boxes in our life. And so we need to be thinking about those expenses that come up at different times during the year. Maybe you have an annual insurance premium that pays in January, or, so I like to get people thinking of like, what does your year look like? Can you identify some expensive months that we need to be saving for now? And then if you get paid as a business, so where the paycheck comes into the business account and then you move some money over to your personal account, which some people have, and then some people kind of have it all together. What I like about touring, or where the cycles of money come in and out, is I like figuring out what does life cost you? Because that doesn't have to change. So if you need 5,000 pounds a month, it doesn't matter if you've had a $15,000 month. In your personal account, you're keeping $5,000. And so that other money has to have a job. So I don't know if it's the same over there, but I like to set up a high interest savings account, and a lot of accounts allow you to virtually label it. So if you know that you're saving for specific purposes, you can go ahead and label it. And when we label our savings, we're 20% more likely to contribute to the goal. So a lot of times, like we never actually take the time to think about what are our dreams and our wishes and our goals because we're just in survival mode. But I want to get you out of survival mode. So I want to get you where you feel like your month to month is in a flow, regardless of when the income is coming in. Again, we want to figure out what your expenses are, and then we'll back into the income. And so if we can get in a steady flow of what you need and what's coming in, then we can bump out our time horizon and say, okay, now I have some breathing room to think about what I want and what are my longer term goals and kind of where do I want to put money to work for me, and kind of stuff like that.
I think when we had Jake on the first session, we talked about this. We talked about, and Keith Woods actually dropped in the chat there. It says about tax. Now, tax is it's a fundamental part of our lives. We have to pay it, like it or not. Um, but it's what you do with that tax money. And that tax money, it's no good just sitting, like you say, your checking account and just sitting there and not earning anything because most of us will pay many thousands of pounds in tax. So it's about then being sensible with that. Like you say, high interest accounts. If that money's sitting there for 12 months and you keep topping it up every month, then it's earning more interest. And if that's one of the things I've done before is we've done it with our tax, and I take that money at the end of it, and because it's and I can then put it into my pension. that's how I, top up my pension. But also
Yeah.
those things can be used for your special treats. Like in Joanne's case, it could be for all of those wonderful sunglasses, or a
Right.
holiday or a day out or something like that. So it is being smart with your money, isn't it? Because everybody seems to feel the pinch nowadays. It is very tough out there. I don't know anybody that sits back and goes, "Well, I'm all right." Everybody's in some shape or form, whether it's the general consensus in life of having to pay your rent or your mortgage and your bills, and those are the things that that really seem to grind us down, I think.
Yeah, and I also like, especially during these times, to find things that bring you joy that don't cost money. We so often correlate enjoyment with spending, and I have a sheet 50 things that don't cost a thing. If you're out and about, taking walks with friends. I have a client who instead of meeting people for coffee now for networking, she asks people if they want to go on a walk. Um, taking care of yourself, because I do feel that financial, mental, and physical health are all interconnected. So whether that's getting with nature, whether that's doing a meal with friends, at one person's place rather than going out, just kind of like looking at how you live your life and finding ways to bring in that joy in other ways.
I wonder, has anyone got any questions as well for Rachel? There's time at the end as well, but in case there's anything you're thinking of right now you'd like to ask. I'm also laughing when Keith put tax in the chat as well. If I was setting up a special account and I called it tax, I think I'd flinch every time.
Oh, I have one, but I like seeing it grow because we have to pay our taxes quarterly here. And so I get people to create that tax account, and then automatically 30% of their check is going to their tax account. So when they have to go make the estimated payment, rather than seeing their savings account as one big number with the buckets, they're like, okay, that's my tax part. That's my vacation part. Like, we just condition our brain differently.
Brilliant. Gary's asking if you can share the 50.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm going to put a link. If you want to get any of my free materials, I'll send money story, spending with values in mind. I also have an income planner, which I didn't get to, but I have a Google sheet where you can lay out your gigs for 2025 and it will total it by month at the top. Because just as important as it is to see your gigs, I think it's important to see your gaps. So I want you to see, maybe that, again, back to that, I need 5,000 or 5,000 pounds a month. Um, how do I get there? And if you see it in front of you by month, that would, help you kind of see where your gaps are and where you need to make some changes. We want to build the cash reserves, whether you call it an emergency savings. I like cash reserves because your life is fluctuating. So you didn't do anything wrong by needing to lean into the money. So calling it reserves, it's just helping you ride the flow. And so the more we can kind of stock up on that, the less we can weather it. We can take the gigs we want to take rather than having to take the first phone call too.
I think a lot of people don't do that, do they? That what they don't do is, yes, they can plan, they can go, well, this is how much I need, but then actually don't physically, as a self-employed person, whether you're sole trader or a limited company, you still got money coming in, but you still need to know where that money is. So it's kind of like, well, if I plan for this and I know I've got, like in the live music industry, like festival industry, January, February, March are terrible because no one wants to
Sure.
stand in the middle of a field in January. It's just that's the way it is. So we know that those are very, very lean months. And that's the time when we really need to make sure that May to September, for instance, in the festival season, where we're all running around like headless chickens, and Susie and I often have these conversations about not enough time in the day. But what we don't tend to do is just take a step back and then go, how much money's coming in and how much can I save for that rainy day? I think Susie likes to call it, which is a great saying, your war chest. So have it in your war chest and keep hold of those things so that you've got them. So when those times become lean, you're like, well, at least I've got a little bit of money just to see me through.
Or maybe your life works on 9 months and those 3 months are recovery. And rather than feeling bad about it that there's no work, you've built that into your plan, that that's how you run your life. Like
Yeah.
that's the whole beauty of being a freelancer is you can use it to your advantage too.
Yeah. I think one of the main reasons that we started this, isn't it, Susie, was because one of the things that Backup Tech said to us was they do hardship grants for people, and they would do a hardship grant, say in January for somebody, and it would be like £1,000, £1,200, or whatever. and then they would get that help that they needed for a couple of months just to pay their rent. But then 12 months later, that same people, that same group of people would be coming back saying, "Oh, I've got no money again." So I think this is so great that we've been able to do this, and hopefully, when people are on these calls and they watch the videos back, they will start to think about just how they can change their spending habits, because I think that's the fundamental, isn't it? It's changing your spending habits to make sure that you can get through the lean periods.
Yeah. And knowing that money buys you choices. So if
Yeah.
you want to have choices, we have to use it smart, you know?
That's such a different mindset to kind of hand to mouth.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? We all went through COVID and you wondered what have we learned? You know, we still got quite a lot to learn, haven't we, as a kind of industry for planning and yeah. Thank you.
Hopefully,
What an amazingly insightful sharing. Thank you.
thank you, Rachel. I think now we're going to move on to part two of the webinar, and we have Mr. Dean Marsh. Dean Marsh is a lawyer. Dean is a legal and business advisor to the creative industries and provides numerous services. So, Dean, first of all, welcome to the webinar.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Yeah, good to talk to you all. Yeah, my name's Dean Marsh. I'm based in Brighton. I've also got an office in Dublin, and my company is called Creative Law and Business. And yeah, I provide informed legal and business advice to the creative industries, to creative talent, and also to businesses working in that space. It's predominantly music business, I would say, but there's also quite a lot of work in the film and TV industry, digital media, fashion, visual artists, and I also do quite a lot of work in the live world, acting for various festivals and for event management companies and music companies running stages at big festivals. So right across the board. But what I do is a little different from most solicitors or most music lawyers, I would say, because it's covering two bases. It's two for the price of one, I would say. It's the legal advice. So I was a practicing solicitor for many years, but it's also, as importantly, if not more importantly, I think at the moment, it's about the commercial aspects and the business side, because the law hasn't really kept up with what's going on in the entertainment space, the creative industries. And yeah, and it's important that artists particularly and freelancers have an understanding about the commercial realities and that they protect themselves and that they have an understanding. Music managers, are few and far between these days, and a lot of people in the industry are having to fend for themselves, and I can be there to give them guidance and assistance and help them stay on course, hopefully. But yeah, I've been doing it a long time, and I work on both sides, I guess. Yeah, sorry, Susie.
I was going to butt in and say it's an interesting thing when you say, there's artists that have to fend for themselves. And I always think freelancers have to fend for
Absolutely.
themselves. There's no HR. It's really hard to know where you can go for advice about these kind of things, and knowledge.
I think a lot of people in the industry get somewhat bewildered by it all because it is, a complex and fast changing industry. And a lot of people are doing deals on a handshake. They can't afford to get legal advice. They can't afford, or they're scared of, of raising the question of formalizing an agreement with someone that they might have a business and friendship relationship with. They feel that might damage the relationship, which is a little bit short-sighted, I think. So I'm always there trying to advise people that they need to protect themselves, really, and having a simple agreement in place can avoid misunderstandings, and misunderstandings can lead to disputes, which could lead to litigation, and also it can damage friendships. And I think, I've seen situations where people have been working together with people that they've got a long lasting relationship and things have turned sour, not because someone's necessarily been ripped off or legged over, but because there's a difference of perception about what the deal was because it wasn't formalized. So that's what I wanted to speak to you guys today about, really, was just making sure that you avoid those pitfalls.
Can I ask then? So, should we start with, I guess, a kind of good place to start would be contracts and terms and conditions. I'm thinking, depending on what area people work in, might depend on whether or not they actually get a written contract. So, it would normally be, as a freelancer, you'd be receiving that from your, temporary employer, you would hope. And you might do if you're in broadcast, possibly in events, especially if you work with someone like Paul. But if you work in music and quite often touring, a lot of us have work agreed verbally over the phone. So what
Yeah.
happens in that kind of scenario? What would you suggest? I mean, it's more common than not in that world that it's verbal. It's a phone call. If you're lucky, there might be something sketchy in
Yeah.
an email.
Well, I suppose, as I mentioned, it's a good idea to have something formalized, but the harsh reality, as you say, Susie, is that often it's a phone call, it's an email, it's, I've got a gig for you. Do you want to do it? How much is it? And someone agrees. And if there isn't an agreement, and it would normally be the person that is engaging you who would send you that agreement to look at. And also, I would advise anyone who is sent an agreement to read it and make sure they understand what they're signing. And if there's anything in there that they don't understand, to query it and ask for an explanation. And whatever is being proposed in terms of the deal, the rate of pay and the other elements that we can talk about in a minute, negotiate. Whatever has been offered isn't necessarily the best that is on offer. It may be possible to get improvements on those commercial terms. But if someone does send something to you and you sign it, then it is a legally binding agreement. But as a matter of contract law, a contract doesn't need to be in writing. A verbal agreement is just as enforceable as a written agreement if there was an intention to create legal relations and certain other boxes are ticked. So a verbal agreement is still binding, but where the problem lies is that if you haven't set out what the terms are, particularly regarding what are you exactly being engaged to do? What is the scope of your work? What are those services? And how are you going to be paid? And when are you going to be paid? And various other considerations. It becomes a little bit of a grey area, I would say. But I think that if someone does contact you and ask you if you want to do some work for them, then it would be a good idea for you to take the initiative and to maybe email them or send them some written confirmation or text, WhatsApp message even, just saying, oh yeah, just confirming what we discussed and trying to get some clarity on certain particular elements of the contract so there's no uncertainty. And that's in your interest. And also, I think I would say in relation to your clients as well, because uncertainty is not good for anyone.
So would
Gary,
that
you've
be...
got, sorry, beg your pardon, Susie, go on.
Oh, sorry, Paul. I was going to say, would that be then, okay, as I see it, you've agreed to pay me a rate of this per day. That
Yeah.
includes show days, travel days, rehearsal days, plus cover the following expenses. So is that the kind of thing you mean?
Yeah, I think those are the key elements. How, what is the rate of pay? What is the duration of the job? Is it going to be for a particular show? Is it for a whole tour? in what circumstances can they terminate the agreement? That's also very important to know. Liability, I think, is also a very important factor. If there was something that went wrong, if someone had an accident at work, whose responsibility is that? Is that something that's covered by insurance? Is that thing that, maybe one for Gary, actually, is that something that should be covered by the freelancer's own insurance policy, which they're unlikely to have, I would reckon, or is it something that their client will be taking out? So all of those things, I would say.
Gary, I know you got your hand up, right on you.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, so my first point, the reason for raising my hand was a question for Dean. If you have an email string that has the scope of services in it and it has your pay per day, is there no, is that as strong as having a separate file signed contract with all that information in? Does it have exactly the same legal weight?
No, because I think if you have a signed contract or even T&Cs are becoming more common. When I represent event organizers, I often recommend that they use T&Cs because they're easier to deal with, actually, because if someone's presented with some T&Cs, often they think, oh, this is kind of standard terms, and they'll just agree to it. Whereas if you're sent a draft agreement, you may well go off, you'd be recommended to go and see a lawyer and just get them to check it over. But to answer your question, Gary, no, an email or a WhatsApp message with various points in it isn't as good as having a written contract or some T&Cs, because it won't cover everything. It will just cover certain points. But it's better than nothing, I would say. It's better than just having a conversation on a phone call and your recollection of what was agreed may differ. Someone might say, well, I didn't agree to offer you that. It was less. Just the basic things, the rate of pay and how many days that you were going to work may vary. You may have misheard someone. They may move the goalposts. You don't know.
Yeah, but on that again, and so on that point that you went on to about the insurance considerations in a contract, there's two different types of financial loss that might come from it, and one, as you said, might be the freelancer themselves being alleged to be responsible for the fact that they've injured somebody or that they've damaged somebody's property. And there isn't a lot, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but as my understanding, there isn't a lot that you can write in a contract that will get away from your duty of care. And if you've done that act, it doesn't really matter what's in a contract, you'll be liable for it if it's to do with injury or damage.
Yeah, you can't exclude liability.
The important part, and what you can do, I think, in your contract is a limitation of liability for any other sort of consequential losses, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah, you can. You can limit liability to a certain amount that may not exceed the payment that's being made to the freelancer, or it could be certain other damages are not available.
Yeah, again, and again, it goes back to this core point of whether the individual has got any bargaining power. But it's something that people might want to consider in terms of limiting any other, if they make an error, no injury, no damage, but if they make an error and it gives rise to a financial loss for the promoter, as in a cancelled show or whatever, they might want to consider when they're contracting to limit their liability to the value of whatever they're being paid for the job, rather than then be liable for all other consequential losses as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to stop. And it would be a good idea, I would say, for the freelancer to have their own set of terms and conditions and, reverse the trend, and for them to submit that to their client. Here are my terms and conditions. And I know I've been talking to Susie about perhaps getting a generic set of T&Cs for your members that could be used, in those circumstances. So that's something that we're going to be looking at doing maybe in the future. But there's no reason why you need to wait for someone to send you some terms and conditions that aren't going to arrive. You could have your own.
So
Paul,
yeah, I'm just going to make the point again. We've had this point before, and I've said that pretty much every business, whether it's large or small, will always have some terms and conditions. When they write out a quotation, you will send the quotation off, and attached to that should be your terms and conditions, like your payment terms,
Yes,
force majeure, liabilities, limitations, all of
absolutely.
this. But freelancers don't tend to do this because, as you know, if we're looking in the comments in the chat, people say, in 25 years, I think I've only ever seen one contract, and I didn't sign. I didn't sign it, and this is it's quite commonplace. I've also dropped in some very basic stuff about elements of contract, which is offer, acceptance, and consideration. There's a
Yes.
couple of other elements to that, but it just gives people a very basic understanding of what you need to have some kind of contract. I think we'll come back onto that point about the contracts for freelancers, because we've got Susie and I have been working on something, and I know Dean, you've been involved, and there's lots of other people. So I
Yes.
think that will be something that we'll come back to. But I think from the point of view of everybody being in effect self-employed, a bona fide subcontractor, we should really start to think about having terms and conditions. It's not something that we should be frightened of, because all it does, it lays out exactly what each party is going to do. And I think this makes us more professional, makes us more hireable, and it shows your professional competence to a prospective client. If you just agree to a rate and then 2 weeks later that is misinterpreted. We see it all of the time on the freelancers forum, where somebody has been asked about a job and they've been booked, and then 3 weeks before they ask about this, and it's like, oh no, that job went away. So there's been no agreement, and then everybody
Yes.
said, well, what about my cancellation fee? So I think that maybe leads into cancellations and how we
Yes.
manage cancellations. Does that make was that a good segue?
That's a very good segue, Paul. But I agree that that is something that is a big bone of contention, I would say. You have put a tour in your diary. You're all committed. You might have turned down other work for this commitment, and at the last moment, whatever the reason, ticket sales or whatever the problem is, the gig is cancelled. You don't have a contract, and yeah, the person who's hired you says, sorry, there's not any work available. Maybe in 6 months' time I'll be in touch, and they leave you high and dry. I mean, what can you do in that situation? I mean, if there isn't a contract, I think you're in a rather precarious situation. There isn't any legal grounds. It's not like you're an employee where you would have the rights potentially to claim for unfair dismissal, or you would have a legal entitlement to a written agreement. You are in a vulnerable situation. I suppose you need to try and negotiate the best outcome that you can in the circumstances. But I would say in that situation, it really would depend, I think. I mean, I've just drafted a contract for a tour manager, which is an unusual thing. The first one I've seen, but someone wanted one. And in those circumstances, it was agreed that if the tour or the event was cancelled by the artist, then there would be an entitlement to a cancellation fee. If it was a force majeure type scenario, then that would be something where they would negotiate in good faith some kind of compensation. It would be depending on the circumstances, whether it was completely an act of God or something, or not. Yes, Susie.
I was just going to ask, so what happens if you take the initiative,
Yes.
you issue, whether it's some form of contract or let's call it agreement, less scary, because
Yes.
then we all have that paranoia with freelance if we're too much of a pain in the ass, and then maybe they'll go somewhere else.
Mm.
But say you do issue, say you send an email and go, this is what I see our agreement was, please find my terms and conditions attached, and you send that, and they don't acknowledge it, but they engage you in the job.
Yes.
Does that mean they've accepted what you've sent them, or where would you stand then?
Well, that's a very good question, actually. I would say that you should include within your terms and conditions or your email something saying to the effect that, in the event that, I don't hear from you or you engage me, then these terms and conditions or those, what I've stated in my email will apply. And then there's a principle of kind of acquiescence. If someone is aware of your position, what you've stated, and they don't object to it or come back with their own terms and conditions, they are by implication accepting what you've sent over. I mean, silence as a matter of law is not acceptance, but in the circumstances, if someone, has seen your terms and conditions and has impliedly accepted them and has acted in accordance with them, then yeah, I think that it would be deemed to be accepted.
And Simon's put in the chat. So if if they send you their terms and conditions as well, then whose would take priority?
Well, that often happens with big companies who are contracting with each other. It's the battle of the terms and conditions. One company will send someone their set, and then the other company will send their set, and you end up in a situation as to, which one prevails. I would say it would be the one that sent the terms and conditions last, if you haven't objected to them, then, as I mentioned, you may have acquiesced to their set of terms and conditions that came over post yours. It's offer and acceptance, really. So if that represents an offer that someone has accepted by starting work, then I would say that itself could form a contract. I mean, another thing just about, I think there is a difference. We're talking about freelancers here. And I think most of the people that are on this call are probably freelancers to the extent that they're doing short-time work, short-time jobs, for a multitude of different clients. Whereas there is another term that's sometimes used interchangeably, in kind of common parlance, which is a contractor. And what is the difference between a contractor? Some of your clients here, some of your members may actually be contractors. Contractors generally only have one client, and they tend to work for a longer period, and the deal may look quite analogous really to an employment type situation. And in that case, there are often other implications that are relevant, because a client might well ask for exclusivity and non-compete clauses, that kind of thing, which is sometimes applicable. And that's something that people need to be very careful about. If they are sent a contract, make sure that they understand what restrictions, if any, there are in these contracts, because it could inhibit their ability to go and work elsewhere. That is sometimes a factor, but perhaps not so much in this world.
It has happened before with two of the bigger promoters, with Hyde Park, because they've kind of interchanged between that. And if you, as a freelancer, would work for one particular promoter, then they said you were not allowed to work for that promoter, and if you did, you wouldn't get any work. And that's, it's kind of that has been commonplace.
Yeah.
It's interesting you said about the terms and conditions. I still have it's in place with one of the largest promoters in the world. And we negotiated our terms and conditions. They sent us their terms, and their standard terms were 60 days, and they would pay me 30% upfront, and the rest would be paid afterwards. And they reserved the right to withhold it for any issue whatsoever. And I said
Right.
no. So
Yeah.
I went back and we redacted lots of things and we sent the contract backwards and forwards and they would send it back to us with exactly the same stuff in it and then they wouldn't change it. I then went to site, started work on site, and they said, "You haven't signed the terms and conditions." I said, "No, because I don't accept them. I've sent you mine instead." And they said, "Well, what are we going to do?" I said, "Well, you probably need to pass it to your legal team, get them to look at it and agree it, and we'll sign it. All you need to do is put these in, build it into the contract."
Yeah.
They didn't do that. What they actually did was they cut and pasted in my email into the contract, which was, I mean, it's a legally binding document
Right.
now, but this is as I say, a very, very
I think
global
I know. I
promoter.
think I can guess who that is.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it never surprises me. So, when we talk about terms and conditions, you should never be afraid as a freelancer to raise that subject and broach the subject to say to
Absolutely.
anybody, this is what I want to do. And if people say, oh, well, you're getting all legal on us, you're not getting all legal on them. You say, I'm being more professional. You're going to send me yours and I'm going to send you mine, and we're going to agree something along the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
One
It
of
can
the
be an
one of the
amalgamation of the two.
yeah, one of the things that I think is very key to this is things like what happens. Like we've got a contract in place. What happens when that changes? So we're on site, and instead of working your standard 22-hour day, you've got to work a 41-hour day, and your workload doubles. How do we deal with that? Because we've got a contract in place. Are we in a breach of contract, or how do we deal with that?
Well, that's a very good question. Yeah, I would call that scope creep, basically. You're in a situation where the scope of your work has expanded and you had agreed a certain rate for a certain number of hours, and then you get there and they want you to work more hours for the same pay. That would be a breach of contract, I would say. It would entitle you to accept that as a repudiation of the agreement and leave the job and sue them. But the harsh reality is you don't want to get into a situation where you have to leave a job and start getting into litigation. It's going to be, only benefiting, lawyers. It's not going to help your cash flow. So in that situation, I think the sensible thing is to try and be pragmatic about this and to renegotiate the deal. If someone wants you to work longer hours, then you should be paid more. You should get proportionately more money. And it would be helpful if, as I advised at the beginning of this conversation, if you've got it even in a text message or an email that you're going to get paid X for Y hours, if they start trying to get you to do X plus, whatever, you should get paid more, and maybe record that in the communication.
Yeah.
It's a really difficult thing though, because the hours thing, we notoriously work incredibly long hours, and rarely is, trying to think if I've ever had the conversation of, you're working with this bunch of people, whatever, you're going here, as to what the working day might entail. You're kind of hired according to your job title, and you have
Yeah.
this idea of what that job title might entail, but then it's really different client to client. So I wonder then if it might be knowing sometimes, especially when you work with new people, that you agree to a job, you think it's this, you agree to this, and then it becomes apparent that actually under your remit are a whole load of other things that have never been discussed. So would that be then back to the sort of terms and conditions, kind of uh, almost putting in some kind of job description?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it could be that you're getting paid by the hour, and that's the way I was explaining it to Paul. But it could be it's a buyout for the job, however long it takes, or it could be based upon certain deliverables. But it depends how you're getting paid. There are lots of different payment methods and payment rates for different types of work, I guess. And if you're signing up, to be a tour manager, say, then that's it's a 24-hour job, really, I imagine. And you're not going to get any overtime. and that's just the nature of the beast. But if you are being engaged to provide certain specific services, and it was a 9 to 5 type scenario, if you're being asked to work into the evenings, then perhaps that is something that would require you or enable you to ask for additional remuneration.
It's also, I think, putting, and somebody's said in the chat as well, scope of work. So when you're thinking about these terms and conditions and maybe talking to somebody like yourself, is having got that in there to say, this is what my work entails. And
Yeah,
should that run over, there will be an additional cost or an
absolutely. Yeah,
additional charge. And
that's
keeping
the
it simple. Yeah.
yeah, that's the fundamental thing that I think you need to include, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I suppose the other thing that we should address is what happens if they don't pay you. You do the job, and then it's like, oh, where's my payments? And you start chasing them, and I don't know, either they don't have the money, or they just don't want to pay you, or whatever, or they may have some kind of grievance against you. They might claim that you didn't do a good job. What do you do then? Well, there are a number of different things that you could do. You could complain and get on their case and harangue them until they pay you, or you could go down the legal route. There's a thing now called Money Claim Online, which is a government website which allows anyone who is owed up to £25,000 to issue proceedings without going anywhere near a court. You just fill out a form online. It's quite inexpensive. I think it's like 50 quid or something for a relatively, for a few grand, I think. And it's dealt with in a very unlawyer-like way. Lawyers don't need to get involved. You can add interest to the debt at the rate of 8% per annum. Or another way you could do it is, if you're owed more than 750 quid, you can go down the liquidation route. You could serve on them a statutory demand, which is a precursor to a winding up petition if it's a company or a bank, or a stat demand, which is a precursor to a bankruptcy petition, which will often scare someone into paying. But maybe another sensible thing that you could put in to your T&Cs or contracts, or try and include in a contract that's been sent to you, is a provision for alternative dispute resolution, some form of mediation or an arbitration. There's arbitration proceedings, which is a much less stressful and perhaps quicker way of dealing with these disputes, where it's decided upon by maybe an expert in the particular field.
I think the money claim online, they try to do that, don't they, with arbitration? I think if the claim is disputed by the defendant, I think they then use an arbitrator to speak to both of you to try and settle the claim.
Yeah, like
Before it
mediation,
goes any
that is.
further.
Yeah,
Mediation. Yeah,
mediation, yeah.
yeah. We did have this question posed to us, I think, when Susie and I did Plaza. Somebody talked about it, and I said, my advice was, I said, yes, you can go down that route. However, it depends on whether or not you want to work with these people again. If you're set and saying they don't, that's it, I'm done with them, then yes, because you're not going to work for these people once again, or this company, once you've gone down that route, if you have to go down that route. I would
True.
be quite surprised if a company did. That yesterday we had somebody on the forum talking about lack of payment. And one of the things they talked about was the actual how that is actually structured. So if somebody hasn't paid you, how does that work? The standard terms is, our payments are 30 days, but what happens after that period? So say you're a freelancer, you're a tour manager, and you've got 3 grand outstanding, you've put your invoice in, and 4 or 5 weeks down the line, you haven't been paid. What's the course of action that you can actually do there? Obviously, apart from keep emailing them and talking to them and asking them and being polite rather than swearing at them down the phone. So what's the situation there if somebody hasn't paid you and the time scale so that we can
Well,
understand that.
if they're late in paying you, there is a statute, the Late Payment of Commercial Debt Act 1998, which allows someone who's owed money to charge interest at 8% over the Bank of England base rate, which is currently 4.5%. So send them another invoice
Yeah.
and see that the interest is clocking up. That's quite a hefty rate of interest there. And hopefully that will be an incentive for them to cough up. But you never know.
Yeah.
I wanted to read out, actually, Rachel's put a really interesting comment about, asking for a retainer or a payment schedule. I've definitely had, at the beginning of a long run of tours where, you know, I've discussed with the accountant and said, okay, what's going to work for you? How do you want people to invoice? And then we'll work out payment dates, for which, and then people might put in an invoice right at the beginning, and then we've worked out how that's broken down, in the coming weeks when they can expect some payment. Which again is that thinking ahead, isn't it? And asking ahead,
Yes.
which I think is really interesting. Retainer, yeah, I don't know if that amazing golden word you hear so rarely now, retainer. Whether you would get a retainer in the UK, I don't know. Maybe, I guess it depends on,
Depends on
um,
the circumstances, I guess,
yeah.
in your
Mm.
skill set.
But certainly no harm in asking if it's like a long period of work.
Absolutely.
And I
That's more of a
think,
kind of contractor type scenario, I think.
yeah, but also depending on what you do, quite often there can be quite a big prep going into the job, and even a discussion about, well, when can I invoice? Because again, it's cash flow, isn't it?
Of
For
course.
some artists, some tours, they might not actually have that much money, uh, beyond their setup costs. They might be spending it on, kit and rehearsal studio hire and whatever. And actually, it's not been thought about that you've actually just done, 15 days prep, and you're expecting to invoice and be paid before the tour starts. So again, goes back to the beginning, doesn't it? Say upfront what you need. Has anyone got any questions? Have we missed anything in the chat?
There's
Great
a
chat, Mike.
there's a few things in there. I mentioned working time directive and legal hours you work per week or at night. And also Rachel said about getting your invoices submitted timely.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in on a long period. If you're away for 3 months, like as exactly Susie said, like you can't wait 3 months. And if you've done prep work, you're 3.5 months down the line to get paid. That's a huge amount of money outstanding. So it's about staggering those payments. And you know, a business would normally do that. Like for us, running a festival scenario. If we go to a festival or we're delivering a live music event, we will ask for a deposit and then staggered payments, leaving something left at the end, just to protect us so that we
Yes.
don't end up with, a big chunk of money owed at the end and the promoter then decides to, wind up and go and live in the Bahamas. So it is about making sure again it all goes back to being timely with your money and your payments and not being so busy that you can't sit down for 10 minutes every week and make sure that you get your invoices done and ready to send off. At the very least, have them ready to send off.
Yes. Agreed.
Um, I think the other one, oh, there's a nice Priya's on here. Hello, Priya. Priya and I have had quite a bit of a conversation over the years. She said I went on Paul's Facebook group to seek advice about complaining about bad treatment and no payment for a job, and the majority of people just said leave it and that I didn't have stamina to be in the game. I think that's terrible, by the way. I think the majority of people just avoid that employer, but the next person will end up being a mug like me, walking into bad environments, and that we've enabled. So I think that happens a lot with the freelancers. What will happen is that they're treated badly, the payment terms are absolutely diabolical, but nothing is ever done about that. I think what happens is we have a system where we won't allow naming and shaming directly on the forum, but then you also know that there are people out there, there are good companies and bad companies. And the good thing about the freelance community is that news travels fast. Well, when
Yeah.
somebody's treating you really badly, you tend to try and avoid them. Like, so when you get that call, you're normally like, am I really that interested in this? Am I desperate? Do I need the money? No, I'm all right, thanks. I'm going to wash my hair this week. I'm going to stay at home.
Yeah. I suppose calling someone out on social media can be
Yeah.
quite effective as well.
Yeah, it can, but again, the same thing is there's two sides to every story, which is why on the forum somebody might have a grievance with a company, but we don't know the other side of the company, so we try and keep a balance in that respect, and say, look,
Yes.
the first port of call is always a conversation and see if you can negotiate and talk to people, isn't it? Before you start throwing, it's having a good record of what, like you said, about having, emails and correspondence so that if you're going to go to court, you're going to have to prove that. And like you say, the
Yeah.
odd WhatsApp message is not going to work, is it?
Not really. And I think there are dangers of calling someone out because it could be that there's an explanation and it could be defamatory what you're saying and it could backfire. People might, take umbrage with that. So I would always recommend going down the official routes.
Yeah. I'm just having a quick look. I think there's a lot of posers in the industry commenting on posts like that. And I think there are people, a lot of people make idle comments about stuff without even thinking, because social media is sometimes quite
Yeah,
toxic.
someone just said, don't do the jobs that it's having the gumption to say no. That's the thing. Things are tough out there, and it's not always possible, as I mentioned before, to try and negotiate improvements. Work is scarce, but you don't always have to accept the first thing that comes along,
Yeah.
because something else might come along tomorrow that's better paid or has more security, or is a better opportunity to develop into something else. So it's always try and have a long-term view of what you're doing. Try and think about where you want to be in a 3 or 4 or 5 years time, and work towards that. Maybe you don't want to be a freelancer. Maybe you want to set up your own business and and be an entrepreneur. So I think it's about having goals and having, different jobs, different side hustles, different things going on, and not putting all of your eggs in one basket, really. Just trying to limit the risk that you are taking on.
And as Rachel's just rightly said, and if you have good cash reserves and you're in good shape, you get to say no with confidence,
Yes,
which kind
exactly.
of resonates. The whole reason why we're doing all of this stuff is to say if you're in better financial shape, you don't have to put up with those people that that will drag you out. They'll beat you down on the price of your day rate. They'll tell you that you're not paying per diems, we're not providing catering, your hotels you've got to find
Mm.
yourself. And if you're in that situation where you're like, I just need to earn the money, you're going to have to take those jobs. So it is, it resonates back to being more financially savvy, doesn't it?
Yeah, someone mentioned about unionizing freelancers, and that's a very good point. It is quite atrocious that such a large sector of the music industry and entertainment industry are dealt with in such a unprofessional and disrespectful way, and that in other areas of the industry contracts are the norm, and in particularly in the live world they're not. And I think things need to change. What Susie and you guys are doing to try and rectify that is a very good thing. And I think strength in numbers is the way forwards. And if the mentality and the culture can change, then that's excellent.
I think the idea of unionizing has been when I first set the forum up with 34,000 members now. And for many, many years now, people have said, "Why don't we unionize?" And it's that's not my decision. My decision is what the freelancers want. They are in charge of it. I just moderate it. Um, we do have several organisations. We have the PSA that look after predominantly live side of things, and we also have Beck2. They both do great work. They're very limited in the skill set sometimes because they're run by people and they need the membership there as well. So if you're thinking about unionising, the first step would probably be to join the PSA or Beck2 or one of the other unions that have some gravitas. Because as freelancers, if you're going to unionize, you have to need to wait into government. You need to have all of those political aspects covered
Yeah,
so that you can actually make a difference. Because if you can't go to government with an idea and say, this is what we need, we are X amount, 100,000 freelancers in the live industry, and we want better conditions. You need to know that, first of all, you can get into those places in the first place. So you need to make, maybe we look at the organizations that are there. And if freelancers want to do that, look, if the thousands of freelancers said we want a union, then we'd look at how we do that. We've got amazing contacts, Susie and myself, and wealth of people that we can talk to and say, this is what people want. And it's the whole idea of saying to people now, give us your questions, tell us what you want. That's the whole point of the webinars, because we need to find out what people want.
yeah,
But I think as well, I mean, it's funny thinking that survey we did last year, there was amazing information that came out of that, particularly about the way people get treated as freelancers, and cancellations was a really big one. But I guess you have to start, we can have, these ideas about, formalizing it, unionizing it. But right now as well, this is about how do you protect yourself in this weird industry we work in, and whatever facet that is. There isn't a lot of protection. So you have to be brave enough to ask. You have to be confident enough to, it's being professional, isn't it? And again,
absolutely.
there's that fear, that Rachel was tackling too about, we bring ourselves with it, don't we? And that fear of like, if I ask, if I'm too pushy, if I question that, will I get employed again? But likewise, I guess everyone can think of a great role model of someone who does exactly that and actually is busy and works. And, so it's about getting braver, connecting with people
Yeah,
that have
100%.
aims as well. I think it's really important.
Susie, shall we just say, like, shall we talk about having some kind of charter for freelancers that would be appropriate, that could actually be launched into the industry, that the industry would accept? And I know that you and I have had many conversations on this, especially with John Collins at Live and numerous people, about how we do that. And I think on the last webinar, I made a comment about one of the larger the production companies in the UK. I was with their MD, and he said he would most definitely want to see something like that to help with things like cancellation policies. So looking at the companies that are out there, what we do in respect to cancellations, what we do in order to improve the professionalism and quality of freelancers that we have. I, for one, think it's a fantastic idea. I'm going to throw this question out to our panel and say, do you think it's a good idea? And please put your comments in the chat box as well, because we want to know. Do you think having some kind of charter where we could say, these are our basic terms, we will be polite, professional, courtesy, we would turn up on time, we will be sober, and in return, you will pay us fairly, you will look after us, you will feed us, water us, and talk to us nice so that we can bloom. I think that is not an excessive way to approach being more professional. So what do our panelists think?
I think it's common sense, really. I think it's the minimum of what should be required. All of the things that you mentioned there are professional courtesies, I would say. These are they're almost kind of obvious things, and therefore to have that enshrined in some kind of charter would be very helpful, because it can be referred to should anyone deviate.
Yeah, and if there's a written record of how people operate and the basic standards of how they operate, that's always helpful from an insurance point of view as well, because you can evidence to an insurer that somebody is a good risk, probably perceived to be a better risk than the next person because they operate to a certain set of standards. So yeah, it would have benefits from that point of view, absolutely.
And I just want to make the industry better. So this seems like a no-brainer, but getting people to come on board is we need to like bring the decision makers into a forum or something like that, because whenever I push back, it's always, if we actually treated people humanely and didn't overwork them and all of that, touring would not be feasible. So it's complicated.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's look, Susie and I are just two people, and we pontificate quite a lot. But we want to make the industry better. As most people that sit on these panels, most people that work with us and together, we want to make the industry better. The organizations and associations out there are all doing their bit. But it's about having a joined up logic where everyone talks to each other. Susie and I are not going to change the world. We might change it one freelancer at a time, but I think we've probably run out of time before we get anywhere. So it is about joining forces with people and seeing what can be achieved, because the more numbers that you have, the more solid your case is, the better chance you have of improving and making the industry better.
And just to clarify, I don't believe that people should be treated like this. I do believe that there should be a change, and I'm actively trying to be part of that change by bringing the financial wellness piece. So I don't want anyone to think what I see is acceptable, because I don't. And there's a lot of people out there talking about that, and trying to bring mental health counseling on site, other services on site. I know it's not for every tour, and it hasn't made its way throughout. But I know in the US, there's also a survey going around to try to figure out how we can get touring folks health insurance. So there are people trying to put stuff together, and anything that I can get on, for sure, I support.
Thank you.
I'm just looking. Priya said, can someone write us a T&Cs? Yeah, watch this space. Been working on that with Paul and Colin Dean. So massive thank you, Rachel, Dean, Gary, for coming back, Paul for co-wittering with me. Anything you want to say, Paul, before we close up?
No, I think it's been an absolute pleasure. I think Susie and I have enjoyed these 3 webinars immensely. We've learned a lot, met some amazing people. We've had some absolutely fantastic comments. People have been really accepting. We hope to get the edited versions out sooner rather than later. We should get them out in the next couple of weeks. We've got the second one being edited as we speak. We will get all of the fact sheets out. We'll be getting back in touch with our guests just to say, please give us your details and your contacts, and we'll push all of these out. And I think that's all that's left to say is to everybody, thank you so much. Thank you for the participants, the people that have come on. We really appreciate you being here. And thank you to our guests, Dean, Rachel, and Gary. And as always, Simon in the background looking after us, moderating. And most of all, my co-host, Susie. Until next time, we will see you soon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.